I want to thank everybody for coming to my little talk. It's just meant to be a casual talk among friends. That's why I was so scared to make it public. I didn't know it was going to be so public. So let's just pretend we're friends. To my friends in the audience, I'm glad that you're my friends. I'm also happy that more people than I expected signed up for the talk. I hope that you didn't change your mind. And I hope the talk is worth something to you guys. So this is very easy. It's very short. It's only about 700 slides. I'll try to make it within the hour. But the title of my talk is "Seeing Stories and Telling Stories." No, so just as an introduction to myself, as if the press hasn't introduced me enough already. Now, I just want to clarify my position on writing. No, I've been on many sides of the writing profession. I think I've been on all sides. I don't know if it covers all of it, and I want to explain this context because I want to say that I'm not giving this talk as a sort of literary writer only, but maybe as a person who also is a regular guy. No, one of my favorite bands, the Blue Nile, no, spend so much time between albums that somebody asked them, "Why aren't you working on your album?" And they all said, "No, we have lives to lead. No, we have to buy groceries, pay our bills." So I just want to show everybody that being a writer isn't just about writing. Long things or difficult things. No, it's also about writing commercials. No, so these are all the things I've been in alphabetical order, not necessarily in order of income or fulfillment, because I don't know what the order is in terms of income. Actually, I know what the order is when it comes to income. Fiction would be the lowest. No, in fact, I pay yata to have my stories published. One day you'll get that. You'll feel that pleasure too. No, but okay, so. I am a copywriter. I consider myself a copywriter. I've been in the advertising industry for a long time. I own my own small advertising and digital agencies. I have also been in corporate communications for a long time, either as a producer of materials or as a writer of corporate communications. No? This is a very weird, before it was an esoteric area of communications, of general communications, but now it's a very, very specific area. No? Of course, I am a fictionist. I publish not under Sarge as a fictionist. I publish under my more formal name. That's because so I can still know who I am when I'm writing fiction. I'm a magazine writer and a feature writer. I'm proud to be part of the team of Esquire as an editor at large. What editor at large means is that I don't need to go to an office. And I'm also getting large during the pandemic, but still an editor. No? I'm a screenwriter, which doesn't, and I want to say that it doesn't mean that I have produced, that many of my scripts have been produced. No? I've written many screenplays, 2 or 3 of which are now in production. But as screenwriting goes, no, a lot of screenwriters tend to write scripts, but very few of those scripts get published. No? Or produced. No, I also have an SEO team. That's for those who don't know what SEO is. It's search engine optimization. No? So I have a team that produces that. I don't necessarily write that, or I have written that, but it's a very technical side of writing, and a lot of people don't think it's real writing. But if writing is communication, and writing is putting one word after the other, I'd like to think that's writing, just as much as writing is any form of communication that we do today. We don't realize this, and I want to, move this slide a little forward. But people don't realize this, but we're all writers today more than ever. Thanks to the pandemic, we've been reduced to people texting each other or messaging each other in order to communicate. We use text to make bank transactions, to do conduct our everyday activities now more than ever. So the digital realm is actually, if you can look at it, a little bit of a text realm. Now it's shifting toward video, but I'll also talk about storytelling in terms of video. This is why the focus is a little bit on video today. I also want to push us all to be amateurs today. As I mentioned in my previous slide, I've been on many sides of the writing profession, but I always want to think that I'm an amateur. Whenever I start a project or start something, I always like to think that I'm a real amateur, and it's not just sort of like a mind game that I play. I really do think I'm an amateur. Like every word is like when I start something, it's like the first time I'm writing. It's a very difficult way to approach things, but it's the only way I know, and it's not a sort of game I play. I just really approach things that way. Maya Deren, who's one of my real sort of film idols, said that the major obstacle for an amateur filmmaker, for amateur filmmakers, is their own sense of inferiority vis-a-vis professional productions. The very classification amateur has an apologetic ring. But that one very word, no, amateur, from the Latin amateur, which means lover, means one who does something for the love of the thing rather than for economic reasons or necessity. I think this is important because even when I'm writing like professional stuff, like, I started in advertising, writing the back label copy for Magnolia ice cream. So I know what Karaginan is. I know the difference between ice cream spelled with a CREAM and ice cream spelled with CREME. Now I don't know anymore because I don't write back label copy anymore. But what I want to say is that I still did it and I still do it for the love of it. And this is the meaning, Maya Deren continues, from which the amateur filmmaker should take his cue. Instead of envying the script and dialogue writers, the trained actors, the elaborate staff and sets, the enormous production budgets of the professional film, the amateur should make use of the one great advantage which all professionals envy him, namely freedom, both artistic and physical. Maya Deren is one of the great directors of all time, in my opinion. I grew up watching my interest in film. My serious interest in film started with watching one of her films. It's called The Maya Deren Experiment. It's called Meshes of the Afternoon. You can actually look it up on on YouTube. It's actually available. It's it's in the public domain. But what I want to talk about right now is that freedom is really a very important concept right now, especially during the pandemic. I wanted this talk not to be about the writing craft so much. If you want to learn about the writing craft, you can buy a masterclass. Or you can just really read a lot. That's how you know about the craft. Read a lot. But now we're going to talk about something else. I'm going to assume that we're all interested in writing. Otherwise, why would you spend your parang peak siesta hour or peak drinking hour for some doing this or watching me? Unless you're watching this while you're on your siesta, which is what my son is doing just to add to the viewer count. But what I'm going to say is that this is quite important now in terms of the pandemic. And I would like to say that this is the kind of framework that we're working with right now in whatever we're doing. We're living in the kind of pandemic mind. We have a pandemic mind. It is a context that is keeping us locked in. I'm sure you've all seen these memes and articles that guilt trip us by showing us how many these people who have gathered so many additional college degrees, for example, during the 1 year that we were locked in, or learning learning 2 languages, in fact, during that time. They sort of guilt trip us to remain productive. Some of us are frozen into being passive. In other words, some of us feel like we're just gonna veg out. Even if we're working from home, since time and home are very loose terms now, we tend to. Some of us will tend to sink into just watching shows like The Queen's Gambit. I would like to recommend other shows other than that, but we like to think that it has frozen us into being passive. For those people who weren't so productive during the pandemic, and funnily enough, there are articles that talk about how to be productive and articles that talk about excusing ourselves from being productive. All over the internet. And what's funny is what's ironic also is that these are written articles written by real writers. But I just want to say that this sort of guilt tripping or sort of apologist mentality, I think, in my opinion, feeds us into this repetitive, recursive information and data loop. All we're going to do is watch these memes and look at these memes, look at entertainment and be entertained and sort of entertain each other on Facebook. Ironically also, which is the platform this little talk is showing on. Now, most of us are in this repetitive, recursive information and data loop. We can't escape. The information is found online on a singular platform or a couple of platforms, and we tend to feed into it as much as we take from it. That doesn't just mean in a material sense, but also in an emotional sense. All our emotions come from what we read on social media, and we feed into it when we make reactions. Whenever we have a reaction or when we share a post, we feed into it the same amplified emotions that we choose. So this whole information and data loop just magnified during the pandemic. I had a discussion with a friend, and I mentioned to her that, you know, the neural net, no, or the AI, no, must really have accelerated, no, during the pandemic. No, this is because we're all trapped into this information data loop, feeding the system so much data from ourselves. The pandemic has also forced us to return to our pre-pandemic lives and mindsets. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Parang, in my mind, we're all being told that, okay, this is the new normal, or, oh, when we travel again, or when you go back to normal. I'd like to sort of say, excuse me, I don't believe in that. No? I like to believe that the pandemic mind is something else. We've never encountered this kind of disaster, I should say. Not only is it a health disaster, it's also a political disaster for many countries. But I want to say that it also sort of forces us to contend with what is normal. No? This happened, the last time this happened globally, on a global level, was during the war, no? Where people were affected and their minds were colored and their minds were changed during the war. And they had a sort of wartime mind, we should say. No? Pero iba ang pandemic, in my point of view. No? I'd like to compare this to for example, a kind of Holocaust. No? Where we each go through a harrowing sort of tunnel, but each of us has their own little tunnels. No? And each of our minds is colored when we go out. When we go out, we're still blinking. We're coming out of that dark tunnel and it's suddenly bright. If it ever becomes that bright. I just want to say that this concept of us having to return to normal, or returning to our old selves, or claiming back our old selves, we need to think about that process. And I would like to say that understanding stories and telling stories, whether you're writing them, filming them, or speaking them to a friend, no, or a lover, no, is a therapeutic way of breaking out of this kind of boxed in concepts. The idea of remaining productive during the pandemic is a closed concept. I feel it's a very restrictive concept. Or the idea of just taking in as much input as we can, obviously, is a very closed concept. You're merely a receiver. The idea of the entire system where we're locked into social media and we're reacting to it and feeding into it is certainly closed. No? And the idea of us returning to a sort of old normal, no, which we call the new normal, old normal with masks, no, is also a sort of locked-in concept, because we might not get back to that. No? Just like a lot of people from the war never came back to the war. Entire generations, I should say entire cultures, no, have been changed by wars in their own histories. No? So we cannot step outside of our homes and outside of this sort of digital ecosystem that we've built for ourselves and we willingly participate in. But I think we can step outside of ourselves, to observe ourselves and our surroundings, to understand and appreciate changes, to evaluate and navigate the times, and also to create and recreate in order to endure. No, that's why the title of the talk is Enduring Times, because these are times that will endure, they'll last. No, 1 year is a long time, so I want to say that the pandemic has endured. No, and no end is clearly in sight, even though a lot of us are saying we're closer to the end than to the beginning. No, I'd like to think that the change is still ongoing. No? So I would like to present the idea of writing, or the idea of telling a story, not just writing, as a way to observe ourselves and our surroundings. We don't need to plunge ourselves into that tunnel of thinking we should be completely as productive as we were before. No? Let's take a chance to stop and think and sit back and step back from ourselves, observe ourselves and our surroundings, understand and appreciate the changes that have happened or that are happening, to evaluate and navigate these times, and to create and recreate things in order to endure. Writing, of course, is one way to do it. That's my way to do it. That's the only way I know how to do it. No? So I'm going to talk within that tighter context. No? But I'm going to expand it a little bit more as we go along. No? This is a very short slide. I'm on slide 3, only 397 to go. So this is why the title of my talk is Seeing Stories and Telling Stories. And this is why I talk about enduring times. Because these are times that have endured. We've endured this pandemic more than a year. and we want to go forward. And I think that seeing stories and telling stories around us is a fun and unique and creative and also very therapeutic way to go forward. And I want to emphasize therapy because I myself I'm going through a lot, and I see myself sort of going through this entire process that I'm gonna sort of share with you today. So let's talk about seeing stories first. No? When I say seeing stories, I mean reading outside of books. I just want to get away first, step back from the library from which I'm broadcasting this, and talk about the library outside the library, which is the library of other people's stories, the library of film, the library of music, and the things around us. We can actually see stories outside of literature. And that itself is a very underrated. Reality is often underrated. It's also overrated, but there are a lot of stories in reality that allow us to create stories of our own more efficiently, I should say, or even sometimes even more personally, in a more personal and emotional way than reading a book. I'm a huge book reader, but I'm saying this, and it means a lot for me to say this because it means I do believe in this. So one way to sort of see stories is through film. A film is, of course, a story told with visuals, sound, and time. I also want to say it's a handy way to step outside ourselves and learn to understand the narrative. It is through film that we understand the narrative because film is such a unique way of telling a narrative. It's almost like real life, where there's visuals, sound, and time. Kulang na lang feel, although when I saw Blade Runner 2046 in parang this cinema with my spraying water, it tried to add that kind of sense. No, it just really made me throw up. So I'm not going to include that kind of theater here. So film also brings us closest to the literary narrative. I want to say that. But because it is primarily a visual form, it yields so much added significance and possibilities for the viewer and the creator. It can explore and exploit the idea of juxtaposition in several ways. I'm going to show you these reasons. And these are really films that I've loved and enjoyed. And each one is something whose characteristics, such as juxtaposition, whose main trait, such as juxtaposition, just came to me probably on the third or fourth watching. Because when you're watching a film, you're really there to be entertained. Which means to say that this pandemic is a fantastic opportunity for us to see films differently, or to see these things differently. Not just to be entertained, but to draw stories from them and to draw from them the ability to create our own stories. A film can shift point of view and tell a story without words. It can also bring internal and external elements that are not available to the writer to create a story. For example, the music in a film. I'll show you examples now. So I'd like to say that I consider music videos films also. So I'm going to test Facebook's copyright blocking abilities by playing a video of YouTube, one of my favorite videos called Ape Shit. It's 6 minutes, but I really think that everybody should watch this. So I'll play it. Okay, guys, I'm back. What I thought would not happen, happened. We've been blocked by Sony. I'm so proud to be recognized globally by Beyonce. I suspect that Beyonce herself was watching, and she called her managers, who called their managers, to block us because we were playing Ape Shit. Can I say Ape Shit? I can say Ape Shit. I mean, Beyonce, can I say Ape Shit? I can say Ape Shit. So I think they blocked us right in the middle of their song. So I'm just very proud because it really illustrates the power of the neural net, and how much it knows of me, and the power of Beyonce, also I should say. But I'll continue because I think you're blocked right in the middle of the video. I just want to verify. Music was copyrighted and detected by Sony, i.e. Beyonce. Thanks, Ateneo. So in the music video, a black couple made powerful by their art appropriates the world's most famous art museum, traditionally a white space that appropriates culture. So you can see Beyonce and Jay-Z, arguably the most powerful black couple, apart from Barack, of course, the Obamas, of course, appropriate or take over a museum that is traditionally a white space. It's a space for white people. A museum is a European construct, primarily a European construct, in which people went to the East to bring in all sorts of works of art and display it there. Went to the New World and displayed it there. No? That's one of its that was one of its iterations. No, by occupying the Louvre, no, Beyonce and Jay-Z, no, the most powerful Black people in America or in the world, no, take over a white space, and in fact, they mimic and they imitate and they mirror all these famous white works of art. When I say white, I'm talking about, for example, the coronation of Napoleon, no, which is such a white work of art. No, the work of art here, the sculpture shown here, no, is obviously literally a white work of art, but the static artworks are subverted by their performers, mirroring their poses and their style. Thus, they're also telling a story of history. Never in history could these two figures, the very white artwork, no, and the colored person, be juxtaposed together, no, and shown that one is alive while one is literally dead, no, made of dead oil, no, or dead marble. No. This is a powerful juxtaposition that could only have happened during these times. 20 years ago, I doubt that the Louvre would have been able to. Now they rent out the Louvre regularly. I'll tell you why. No, you can read it why. No, the Louvre said there was more than 50% increase. There was a more than 50% increase in under 30 visitors in 2018, thanks to the video shot by the couple in the museum, marking a record number of visitors with over 10 million. The museum has created a guided tour centered around the works of art seen in the apeshit video. That's also interesting because now the museum is trying to reappropriate what the Carters did in appropriating the museum itself. So all of these juxtapositions are happening not just within the work of art itself, within the music video, but also in the viewer and in the time in which the viewer is watching. So there are multiple juxtapositions at work, multiple histories at work, and I should say multiple movements of activism at work here. No? So this is why I love this video, and this is why, interestingly enough, even the backstory of this video, the backstage story, the behind-the-scenes story of this video is interesting. It said that Jay-Z and Beyonce were on tour, and they were in Paris, and they just came up with the idea of what if we shoot in the Louvre? What if we rent the Louvre overnight and shoot it? Those who have been to the Louvre will find it so weird to see it empty like this. No, I mentioned before Beyonce caught us, no, and therefore appropriated Ateneo Press. Before she did that, the only time I remember the filming in Louvre was in a film called Band Apart. That was more than 50 years ago by Godard, no, in which three friends run across the Louvre and make it a race. No, it wasn't empty. The Louvre wasn't empty, and they happened to be white. No, so the next thing I'm gonna show, I'm sure this is not going to be found out by Sony because it's quite an obscure film. The film is called That Obscure Object of Desire. Not such an obscure film, but to me, it's a very elusive story. It's a very elusive narrative because it tells the story of aging Frenchman Mathieu, who falls in love with a beautiful young Spanish woman, Conchita, who is played by two actresses. I have to say that these two actresses playing the same person really don't look alike. You see it in the trailer that I'll show in the next slide. Also, that this kind of narrative, this kind of story in which two different people play one actress in a film shot by a Spaniard, no, a film based on a French novel, I think, no, would never happen except in the medium of film itself. In fact, when I teach this to my creative writing classes, nobody gets it. Nobody gets the meaning of film, what happens in the film. They think there are two separate characters named Conchita. No? And I want to say the first time or even the second time I saw it without the aid of Wikipedia, I couldn't get it either. So this is the trailer.
Monsieur?
Conchita est ici.
Ah, si. Conchita!
Entrez. Je ne suis pas une fille de ce genre-là. Et c'est ce que vous cherchez avec moi, alors partez.
J'ai passé foutu le temps.
Non, c'est de moi quand je pensais à vous, j'étais furieuse. Je voulais plus vous voir. Est-ce que tu m'aimes?
Bien sûr.
Quand je serai vieille, je fais vieille. Tu m'aimes encore?
Je t'aimerai jusqu'à la fin.
Est-ce que je peux m'arranger?
Mais oui, pardon. Conchita.
Et je peux te recevoir en secret. À minuit.
Tu as quelqu'un, dis-le-moi. Pourquoi êtes-vous comme ça? Par peur de commettre un péché. Parfois.
The next film I'm going to talk about is my all-time favorite film, and I'm just going to talk about one film, one scene, the last scene. The film is called 400 Blows, or Quatre Cents Coups in French. That's the only thing I know in French, apart from that other phrase. Antoine Doinel is a young boy growing up in Paris during the 1950s, misunderstood by his parents for playing truant from school and stealing, from school and stealing, and tormented in school for discipline problems by his teacher. Antoine frequently runs away from both places. He finally quits school and steals a typewriter from his stepfather's workplace to finance his plans to leave home. But having been unable to sell it, is apprehended while trying to return it. In other words, he gets put into a prison for juvenile delinquents. No? Antoine escapes under a fence and runs away to the ocean, where he has always wanted to see, which he has always wanted to see. He reaches the shoreline of the sea and runs into it. I'm going to show the last scene in its entirety. It's just a minute and a half. So Francois Truffaut is dead, so I don't think that she'll block it. Seriously, the reason why this final scene is so moving to me, and at the same time signifies so much of what cinema can do and how cinema can actually help us writers write better. No, I've always liked to say that, what a beautiful world it would be if writers saw more films and filmmakers read more books. No, and this is how literary this moment is for me, and how cinematic it is as well. No, in this scene, three things happen within that last scene. No, Truffaut breaks down what cinema can do and defines it at a narrative form. No, Donnell in the first scene, if you look at the left frame, who is Truffaut's alter ego? No? He's like, his life mirrors Truffaut's life. No, breaks the fourth wall and looks straight at the camera. This could not happen in a cinema, in a regular kind of cinema, with actors breaking the fourth wall. Next is the shot freezes just as the camera begins zooming in on him, but the music and the sound continue. Music, of course, is what you call a non-diegetic element to film. It just means it's a non-internal element to the film. It's outside what happens in the reality of the film. The sound of the crashing waves is a diegetic element, which means it's part of the reality that's happening around him. So the camera freezes, the shot freezes, and it zooms in as it freezes. But the sound continues, the music and the soundtrack continue. The camera continues to zoom in on the frozen frame, telling us that the medium itself is not the living truth. Because the film continues with music and sound, but the image has been frozen, and in fact, an outside camera, external to the camera being used in the film to shoot the film, zooms in, means that someone else is controlling it outside the camera itself. So what happens is that Truffaut is telling the story that continues, that promises to continue. Number two, Truffaut is telling the story of what cinema can do that other art forms can't. No other art form can do this. Make the soundtrack continue. Have a soundtrack. Hear the sound of the waves, despite the fact that the action has stopped and we have frozen. And literally, the film has been frozen. And yet after that, add another external element. Zoom in on the frozen photograph. No? Something that the camera used to shoot the film can't even do anymore. It's done in the lab. No? In this way, Truffaut redefines or defines what cinema can do. And this is why the new wave is the new wave. No? So we can also see all these other things happening in visual art, in music, in architecture. There are also stories told through time. I like to focus on time now because these examples have time. I'm reminded also the thing behind me is a photo called Flux by Frankie Callahan. He's a Filipino artist, and he produced this during the time of the pandemic. It's a photograph of light moving on water, of moonlight being reflected of water. For me, this is time within time. No, I'd like to turn you over, guys, to people who actually know how to write about art to describe it. Known for his nighttime photographs with minimal post-processing, he was drawn to the light streaming on the surface of the ocean, breaking the horizon. He took long exposures, resulting in beams of light that subtly illuminated the waves, the night sky, and its surroundings before they recede back into the darkness. By opening the camera for an extended period, he not only captures or draws in light, but also records the passage of time. Through this act, he's able to meld time, space, thought, and feeling into a single surface or image. No? So that's from the liner notes written by Katia Guerrero and Ringo Bunoan. No? For me, it just gives me a feeling of what's in the middle of control and out of control. No? What's in the middle of trying to capture something such as light, such as what exactly a photograph is, and letting go of it, not having any control over light, which is literally also what the photograph is about. So this kind of ambiguity, this kind of middle space, this kind of unexplainable, unspeakable space is what stories are made of. And that's why I like to find stories also in visual art. This is another very popular artwork. I just want to say it's art in time. I want to talk about the art in time element of this because, okay, first of all, it's called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. It's by Damien Hirst. Now, of course, the title itself is meant to be a mindfuck, meant to make you think about the title, make you think about, oh, the shark could be death, no? Or I could be death, or I could be the living mind, and that could be, the shark represents life and vitality, but it's frozen in death. No, there's so many ways to look into it, and when it broke out, Damien Hirst famously sold the painting for $8 million or £8 million. Now it's in the Saatchi Gallery, and I had the pleasure to see it. And it really does look terrifying. That shark looked like it could eat you if only it were alive. And that was probably Damien Hirst's point. The fact is that his art career is barely alive now. Is hardly alive because art changes through time. The appreciation of art changes through time. I should say also, as a cynic, that the valuation of art changes through time. Now people look at it. People look at Damien Hirst and say, he's kitschy. That skull of his with the diamonds all around it, that's kind of kitschy also. There's a video by Jay-Z and Swizz Beatz called On to the Next One, which sort of pokes fun at Damien Hirst's art. I'm not going to show this here because again, that's the second time Jay-Z's going to go after me. Hirst's response to those who said that anyone could have done this artwork, which is a question that has been asked of Picasso, Paul Klee, and all those other great painters. Of course, Pollock, but you didn't, did you? What's interesting about it, that's a very fairly common answer, and that's a fairly understandable response. But what's interesting about this particular artwork is that while it really blew the mind of so many collectors and so many art enthusiasts at the time, now it's kind of regarded as kind of, this is part of the Damien Hirst scam, where he presents something that wasn't really well thought of or well thought about. A lot of people have said that, and yet a lot of people still put value in his artwork. I put a lot of value in his artwork, but that's me. No? But there's also, what I mean to say is that there's an external story in art and time. A story about art within time that's a little closer to home is the story of our very own cultural center of the Philippines, or Tanghala, Pambansa. Now, I'm proud to be working with them on a couple of projects. I've worked with them on a couple of projects before, and as a member of the Philippine Pen, we are partners with them. In fact, they're a great team to work with. No, but anybody who knows the history of the CCP will know how sort of colored it is. No? It was made in the Marcos regime, during the Marcos regime. It's Imelda's little baby. Now it's Imelda's big baby, and I don't know how many people realize that. I'm sure many people know that. I know that whenever I enter, but I still love it. It stands as something I really am proud of. I'm proud to show tourists the CCP. So there's a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of mixed feelings at work. No? And while we should never forget, no, we also must remember that time kind of changes things. This is why never forget is so important. There's another song that I love. No, it's called "Single" by Everything But the Girl. No, I'm just gonna play the first 2 seconds of it because I think Everything But the Girl is run by Sony also. But it's a song that's 4/4 in time signature, but its backbeat is completely made up of a 3/4 time signature backbeat. I'll just let you listen to the beat. Okay, so you can look that up. You can go to Spotify to look at that. But what I want to say is that all these things I've showed you, when I first saw them, whether I was 20 or 30 or 40, they were uncomfortable, they were unfamiliar, and they were uncertain. And that was the way I began to become hungry for a newer kind of narrative. And I became hungry to be able to write my own kind of story by recognizing and seeing these stories in other things. It gave me a kind of hunger, and it gave me also a kind of confidence to say, I can tell my own story. I can tell something like this. And I choose writing as a way to tell it. So it takes a lot of stepping outside of ourselves. It takes a lot of understanding how other stories work. And it takes a lot of understanding the stories within us and around ourselves and telling them with care and with courage. This is why seeing stories for me is such a fun and important thing to do during the pandemic. This also is a great opportunity for us to understand our own stories, our own pandemic stories as they happen in and around our lives. We know that there's a lot of hard news out there, and it happens every day. And we know there's a lot of uncertainty. For a lot of us, there's been a lot of tragedy. And I want for us to see storytelling as a way out of that sort of darkness, as a way out of that, through courage and through being able to understand and tell stories. So what makes a story? This is kind of this is a very elementary question that's very hard to answer. I don't know what makes a story. No, of course, grade school pa lang, high school pa lang, setting, character, plot, conflict. I think there are a lot more. It's like the 4 P's of marketing that have that change depending on what ad agency you go to and how much salary you're paid. Because they like to, for example, they like to call it different things. But it's always been to me setting, character, plot, conflict. But for me, that doesn't necessarily make a story. It's also memory. In other words, your personal experience. Imagination, in other words, the world you want to build or the world you're building, whether it's the current world or a future world or a fantasy world or a world in the past. No? Culture, certainly. We cannot write a story outside of our culture because we are our culture. What makes us our culture. And our history. No? That's something that I feel that we must be responsible about when we write. You can't rewrite history. Yes, that's what makes a story. But for me, what makes a story is one thing. And I have to credit a good friend, Mikael Ko, who's a great poet, who asked me, there's a class I was helping him out by lecturing his class, by giving a lecture to his class about storytelling. But what really makes a story? And I thought about it, and I realized what makes a story is a change happens. No, For me, it's as simple as that. It's not about having a beginning, a middle, or an end. It's not about having great characters or two characters or more. It's not about having a great situation and putting in something unexpected. It's about a change that happens. In fact, the change doesn't even have to happen in the story. The change can happen in the reader as you're reading it. There are stories that read as poems. They're lovely stories. Donald Barthelme is a great writer whose stories, 30 years later, I still can't get his stories. I still can't understand them. And yet 30 years later, I still read them. This is like Finnegan's Wake. Everybody will have pretended to read them, but nobody will dare pretend that they understood it. A change could happen in the reader as you're reading it. A change could happen in the conditions in which the story is read over time. Borges has a great story called Pierre Menand, author of the Don Quixote, in which an author wishes to rewrite Don Quixote and realizes that he can only rewrite it word for word. So what comes out under his byline is the same exact words that Don Quixote, the original Don Quixote, was, as I recall that story. But what I'm said is, because those conditions in which the story was written have changed, the story itself changes, even if it's the same words. If you read 1984 today, and if you read it 100 years into the future, I wonder what changes, how that story would change inside us. So for me, that's what makes a story. It's very simple, very plain, but it's also quite challenging, because we have to make it good. This is where I have these three sort of stupid rules to myself about what makes a good story. I call them stupid because I just sort of invented them, and a lot of people like to read books about how they're made. But I don't know. For me, what makes a good story is one, interestingness. That's really hard. Interestingness, in fact, is a great, interesting word for me. I don't know if it really exists. Pero, I'm in advertising also, we invented words like crispier. We also invented words like nutrilicious, mga ganun. So why not interestingness, right? So it's interestingness. It's very hard to make something interesting. It's very difficult to be an interesting person. I think the pandemic has taught us that the people sleeping beside us pala are not interesting enough. Or sometimes we ourselves are not interesting enough for each other. This is why Zack Snyder has to throw us a 4-hour new version of his old film, because he wants, we need to have interesting stuff all the time. Interestingness in writing means a memorable image, moment, or character. It can also mean just a memorable word. In fact, Finnegan's Wake is an interesting character. James Joyce really knows how to choose his titles. Ulysses is such a great title. A Hard Truth is interesting. This is why I'm saying that when I say a change happens, and that's what makes a story, this is why this is not as easy as it sounds. Number two, to me, what makes a great story is the unspeakable. When I say unspeakable, it's something that you can't explain, something that you cannot narrate, something that you can't verbalize. This is best explained in that Truffaut scene, in the scene from 400 Blows. I can't explain that. I can't write that scene. I can't tell you what the emotion is, but I can feel it. For me, that's what makes a good story, and that's what makes, in fact, a story worth telling. If you're going to tell a story that could have been told as an essay or could have been told as a film, write that essay instead, or make that film. A story exists on its own, and it's supposed to deliver a truth or deliver something that it can't even say. If you read the great stories, the great Filipino stories, starting with NVM Gonzalez's Bread of Salt, if you read a very short story, but at the end, the emotion is something unspeakable. It took that whole story, and not one word more, not one word less, to be able to deliver that unspeakable that makes it a really good story. I'm saying NVM Gonzalez because I'm trying to get back at him, because he once read a story of mine that's unpublished. Once read a story of mine, and he said that, there's a labyrinth here. It's a great labyrinth, but there's no minotaur in the labyrinth. I took that as a negative thing. I should have taken it. It is a negative thing. What I'm saying is, he's saying, I built a good story, but where is the unspeakable in the middle? What is the harsh truth or uncomfortable truth or the real story in the middle that we can't explain? There's a great film called A Separation, by an Iranian director. A great film called A Separation, where in the end, a child is forced to choose or is asked to choose by the court between the two parents. And we stop. The film ends just as she is about to make a decision. We don't know what decision she makes. And it delivers an emotional impact and an emotion that I can't verbalize, but you feel, even if your experience in life is very different. Something you cannot explain, but can only show through action or imagery. It's an emotion or a thing that you cannot tell in any other way or form. That's what makes an unspeakable thing. The third thing for me is the truth. Any story, every story that's ever written, even if it's the wildest fantasy story, it's about the truth. No, I'm going to tell you about one story that I particularly like, one book that I particularly like, Dune. No, it's a fantasy story, completely built up. It's told, zillions of years into the future. You need to suspend your belief about how they retain certain aspects of our culture several times throughout the book. But it's all very relevant. It's as if it were written about, current events. The only thing that's untrue about Dune is its release date, which remains unclear. So truth is a real character, event, or a memory, relived or reimagined. A lot of writers have asked me, a lot of students have asked me, is it okay, is it cheating if I write a story about something that really happened to me? Why is it cheating? It's a story. I don't care if it's fiction or nonfiction. It's a story. Let's not even nail ourselves on that peg. Is it fiction or nonfiction? Where am I going to hang my PhD? Where am I going to hang my reputation? The truth is memory inspired. Still a story. It's a real character. Once you become insincere about what happens, it will show. The truth is a real emotion that has to be relived in the text. A real experience that's made authentic to the text. I'm going to speak later about why authenticity in the text matters, but I'll speak about one aspect of that here. When we write and when we publish, or even when we write for ourselves, we're responsible for the truth in that story. We immediately become responsible people, responsible for the text or the work that we have created. And we can only be responsible for the truth. We can only be responsible people when we create the truth, recreate the truth, reflect the truth, and assert the truth. Otherwise, we fail in our responsibilities as human beings. Some useful things, and that's it for the creative writing part. The reason why is that we're supposed to know craft. We're supposed to know how to tell a story. It's all over us. It's on Instagram. It's on Facebook. It's in Netflix. It's on Netflix. It's on Hulu if you have a VPN. Now, some useful things, and these are useful, but not so difficult, not so hard, not so easy. A lot depends on the first words. I already said that. A memorable image, moment, or character. But this is kind of a practical guide because I'm kind of one of those harsh judges, and you can judge me. You can be a harsh judge in return. Try to appropriate me, but I'll still be Jay-Z if you try to appropriate me. You'll just be the Louvre. A lot depends on a memorable image, moment, or character. When I judge a story, if the first paragraph, the first page is kind of boring, I'll have second thoughts about turning to the next page. That's me as a reader, okay? I'm always judging as a reader, not as a judge. Now, when I judge as an editor, that's when the first paragraph counts. Because if there are any grammatical errors in that first paragraph, it immediately goes into another box. That box is something I'm going to read when there's really nothing else to publish or really nothing else to judge. And maybe I'll look at it another time. So a lot depends on the first words. A lot depends on grammar, these basic things. The war against cliche is constant. This is one thing that the war against cliche is not my original. It's a cliche, in fact. The reason why I chose that, because the very term war against cliche is a cliche. It was invented by Martin Amis. He has a whole great book of essays called The War Against Cliche. The reason why we have to wage this constant war is because, first of all, nobody respects a cliche. Why? Because it's inauthentic. It is not an experience made real through text. The reason why there's a cliche is because we want to say, oh, I need a ball pen. Here's your pilot ball pen. Okay, everybody has this ball pen, right? But everybody writes differently. That's the point. There's a lot of cliches around there that are lazy adaptations of what happens to you in real life and how you feel things and experience things in real life. And because we are all individuals, we feel and experience things differently. No, it's an infinite number of differences in the way we feel things. Our sensoria are all different. So there's no excuse for us to use the same old words to describe the same old things. We need to reach into ourselves and feel exactly what that experience is to ourselves and make it real through text. This is why, while the lecture part on the craft of fiction is so short, but for me, it's kind of really difficult. How do I sort of describe this moment here in which I'm talking to a screen, and I'm looking at myself as if I was lecturing myself? I can talk about that. And zillions of people on Zoom today can talk about that. But if they use the same sort of cliche, and I'll give you a cliche, it's as if I was talking to a mirror. That's a cliche that everybody's going to use. If I give the same cliche, I'm not being true to myself. This is really not how I feel. So whenever we write something about a particular experience, whether large or small, whether we're picking our nose in a story or picking a war with another country in that story, we need to avoid the cliche. The reader is smarter than you. There's a lot of debate about this. A lot of people like to talk when they write. They like to explain things when they write, or they like to act as if the reader were kind of dumber than them. I think it's very useful for us to always imagine that the reader will get it ahead of you, is smarter than you. If you're a mystery writer, especially, the reader will know who the killer is before you do. The reader will always know what the twist is ahead of you. That's on a basic material level. But when we talk about writing style, and writing devices and writing techniques, then it's very useful to know, to have that in mind, to start to pretend that the reader is smarter than you. Of course, as real writers, guys, we all know that we're smarter than everybody else. Not me, the other writers. So your byline is your name. I like to think that a lot of people do not respect their own work, especially those who sort of think that their work is like a hack job, or they think they're writing an article, or they think they're writing a feature article. Or worse, if they're writing something SEO, they think, oh, it's just an SEO article. No. Everything we write with our name. We put our byline on. And I think it's a great exercise for us to put our byline, even if you're writing stupid copy on the copy sheet, because it helps remind us that our byline is our name. One of the last useful things is everything has been done and probably done better. I like to think about that, and invariably, when I'm about to write an idea, parang nga pala, nagawa na yun. So it helps to ask people if they've seen it or not. The Star Wars movies come to mind. We need to take time to know the importance of seeing and understanding. I just want to end with this, because seeing and telling stories, especially during this time, is our way to understand things. It's not about being productive, but it's about being productive in the mind more, being able to understand more. Is our way to create new things, not necessarily just create for the sake of creating. And I see that a lot in myself. I see a lot of writers, a lot of creators all over the world creating just because it's a pandemic and they need to be creating something. And what comes out is this sort of mass mediocrity that's really not about examining themselves and the pandemic context, and the context in which they're in. This is the only way, I think, that we can endure. If we take our context and we deal with it and we write about it or tell stories about it and free ourselves from it eventually. Maya Deren writes, the most important part of your equipment is yourself, your mobile body, your hindi mobile phone, mobile body, your imaginative mind, and your freedom to use both. Make sure you do use them. That's in the very same article that talks about being an amateur. So I'd like to thank all the amateurs that have come in today, all my fellow amateurs who have come in today. And I want to really thank you for taking an hour and 10 minutes of your time. I also want to thank Sony for blocking the music, because it just represents late capitalism. It's not really a cool thing to do. You lost you lost maybe 3 Beyonce fans out of the 3. And UMG also. Thanks, Almira, for marami pa lang nag-block. So many people blocked us. I'm so happy. No, I'm just waiting. Both Sony and UMG blocked us. So thank you for reminding us what capitalism can do. And thank you for attending my short talk. Maybe you have questions, maybe not. It's okay. There's no pressure. Thanks. Are we done? We're going to take questions, if there are any. Okay, I have one question. How do you deal with people coming to you and saying, "I don't understand your story"? Actually, I've dealt with that. I deal with that a lot. A lot of people ask me, like, especially when it's almost time to submit their papers, no, what is the meaning of the story, or I don't understand your story. I think we're all, that is a story. Every story is, to me, a social contract between the writer and the reader. No? Being able to be understood is a tough thing to parse. No, if a person talks to you and says, "I didn't understand the story," you can actually have a conversation with them. No, this is no longer the old world where you come out with a book and bahala na kung sino makaintindi or hindi. Kung maintindihan or hindi. You can actually engage them and have a conversation with them. Ask them why they didn't understand the story. No, I'm not going to presume what kind of position the reader is coming from. No, he might come from a different cultural position. So that's a tough question, but it's now easy to answer that when somebody comes up to you that way. No, just go to them and engage them. That's what I would suggest. We have one more question. How do you overcome the imposter syndrome? I don't know. Okay, the imposter syndrome. Thanks, Dara, for asking that question. Imposter syndrome is when you feel you're like super inferior. You feel like you don't deserve, or you're an imposter in the position you're in. No, because when you're in the middle of writing a work, no, every artist goes through that kind of imposter syndrome. I think everybody has I think that's the default syndrome, I would like to say. And anybody who feels like they deserve to be where they are, no, they've achieved where they are, no? And they're not producing anything anymore. Yes, Mirza, you have a question. Which of your stories was the most difficult to write? Which one took the longest and the shortest? Okay, I think the story that was most difficult, the story that's most difficult to write is always the current story I'm working on. It's not a lie. It's not a sort of pat thing. It's not a pat statement, but it's always the thing that I'm working on. Oh, and I think anybody, parang you're really just focused on that story, and you go through a kind of hell that feels the same, no? Every time you're writing something. And if a story, I'm not, I guess I look at it, I'm answered that a different way. If I was not having difficulty with the story, if I found it so easy to write, there's probably something wrong with that story. No, mechanically, no, something wrong with that story. So I just want to say that I don't have a ranking of stories that are more difficult. I have a favorite story, probably. Probably my favorite story is Nighthawks. It's a very short story. But I just want to go back to that, actually, and talk about difficulty to write. Nighthawks took me many years to write. about 3 years to write because I had to experience it and I had to remember it. I don't know if I have to include that. The story I'm finishing now, which is which is about 65,000 words, has taken 10 years to write. So I don't know if that's included in the difficulty or the ease. Yes, one more. There's one more question. Are you ever afraid of revealing too much when you write? Such a revealing question. Gang, thanks for that question. Are you ever afraid of revealing too much of myself when I write? Parang ano to eh. Naalala ko to parang feeling ko ba bold star ako na parang kulang na lang atay ang pakita ko. Hindi naman, parang okay. I have a book of personal essays. No, I like to say the personal essay, the feature stories called A Waiting Room Companion. Ateneo published it actually. And it's very personal. Talks about my mother, talks about my family. I don't know if my mother has read it. It's more personal to me than my mother. No, so sorry. So it's a very personal book to me. In fact, it's the only book that I've written with Sarge Lacuesta as a byline. It's that personal. It's like me talking to a friend. To be honest, yeah, it's difficult. It's very difficult to over reveal, to reveal oneself, especially when you're talking about. I remember a review that came out of A Waiting Room Companion. It's a book of very personal essays about my growing up years, no? And somebody said he keeps talking about growing up poor. He keeps talking about growing up like not necessarily poor, but growing up wanting a lot of things or being hungry for a lot of things, so being ambitious, no? Or growing up like. With a lot of ambition about who he wants to be, having a lot of idols, stuff like that. He keeps talking about it. Yeah, talagang I repeat myself. No, I think every artist, every writer and creator repeats himself, no, in some form or way. And repeating yourself, there's no other place to go but to reveal yourself or a different side of yourself every time you repeat it. To reveal yourself either more deeply, or to reveal another side of yourself. Pretty soon you'll be emptied out. And I think that's part of the process. That's the part that makes writing so therapeutic. I just want to add here that the internet has provided a lot of opportunities for writers who are afraid to do that, to publish it anonymously. Remember LiveJournal? It's still there. Remember all these blogs? They're still there. And they're a great way to sort of express yourself without revealing too much. And by too much, I mean your name. So there's a therapeutical element to it. And particularly want to thank Gang for asking that, because we're both concerned about the same things. The pandemic has a lot of impact on our mental health. And we do need to tell those things. We do need to unload. That's the last question na pala we'll accommodate. I want to thank you guys for watching. I don't know how many are watching, but I'll assume maybe 10,000, 15,000. I want to thank Beyonce and Sony and UMG for paying attention, for watching. I hope you improve your songs because you keep talking about money. I also hope you guys have learned something, and I want to thank you for watching. Thanks so much.